Hey everyone, we wanted to welcome you to First Tuesdays with Heart. Today's August 6th, and the First Tuesdays is sponsored by the Heart Peer Support Team in connection with the Resiliency and Justice Center, which was previously known as the Vegas Strong Resiliency Center. HEART stands for Healing, Empowering, and Rebuilding Together. We're a peer support program that helps support anyone impacted by any mass violence incident. So real quick, wanted to introduce you to the HEART team for those who haven't joined us before. You just met Alice, who is speaking. She is the co-director of HEART. She's the Route 91 and UNLV support group facilitator. She's been doing the Route 1 for about 4.5 years and the UNLV one since a week after their incident. Jackie is one of our original HEART coaches, and she is the behavioral health program coordinator for the Resiliency and Justice Center. And I'm another co-director of HEART. I'm a Route 91 survivor, and I assist Alice with the UNLV support group. So we always like to start out with a quote or a meme, and we thought this would be perfect for today. It's okay to not be okay. There are always going to be moments where you don't feel okay. And these moments are important. They help you to grow into the person you were always meant to become. So like normal, we want to go over a little bit of housekeeping information. This program is meant for those directly or indirectly impacted by mass violence. And we respectfully ask, if you were not impacted by mass violence, to please remove yourself at this time. We want to ask everybody to be respectful of everyone in the group. We want to make sure that this is a safe space for everyone. Please don't share details of the discussion with anyone outside of tonight's attendees, but please do feel free to share about this program as well as the information and tools you've learned. The intention of this group is to discuss our healing journeys and challenges we may encounter along the way. So because of that, we will not be discussing details of the incidents themselves, as we don't want to activate anyone else. We will in a minute ask you to share which mass violence incident you were impacted by, and that's absolutely fine, but just please don't get into any details. So we're going to try something new this time. In the past, we haven't recorded the Q&A portion of the meeting, but we found there's a lot of really good questions that could help people who aren't able to participate live. We usually have somewhere between 30 and 50 people watch the recording after the program. So we'd really like to be able to get that information to them. You guys have some amazing questions. So what we're going to ask you to do is put your question in the chat, and either Alice, Jackie, or I will read it, and we'll have Maggie answer it. And if you would like to go into an actual discussion, please raise your hand, which is located under the reactions in the Zoom toolbar, and wait to be called on so that we can hopefully remember to pause it. If we forget to pause, we have an IT person who is wonderful and can remove that portion of the video so that we can all remain confidential. So if you would please make sure you're muted when you're not talking. And we will not tolerate politics, conspiracy theories, or weapons discussions. Those are off the table. So we're excited to introduce you to Maggie Feinstein. Maggie is the executive director of the 1027 Healing Partnership, which supports those impacted by the October 27th, 2018 Pittsburgh synagogue incident. She's a master's level professional counselor who has distinguished herself in the field of integrated mental health. And last week, Alice, Jackie, and I were all able to participate in a virtual summit through the National Mass Violence Center, in which Maggie presented on several different topics, and she is absolutely amazing. So I'm so thrilled that she was able to join us tonight. Maggie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you guys for being here. I am really grateful to be in this space. I saw from the chat that a number of you are coming from incidents that happened in the Las Vegas area, but I know that also a lot of people may have been part of those incidents and moved away. So part of what we're going to talk about a little bit today is sort of what happens afterwards. What is what anniversaries look like? What does it look like as a community while we're healing to go through some of those together? And so it sounds like probably in this group, there are some people who know the experience of going through an anniversary together, and people who have done it more independently on their own, either because they're living separately or they maybe are part of incidents that didn't have any sort of natural gathering space. So I'm really glad that we can have the time together, and I'm really just glad that there is a space for gathering. So I can't emphasize enough how much I think that's really the most healing opportunity. So thank you for making the time to be here tonight. So like Jill had mentioned, I am a therapist by training, but I've been running our Resiliency Center in Pittsburgh since we started back in 2019. And I am truly just every day humbled and honored working with communities of victims and learning and constantly, just opportunities to see and to hear from new eyes and new lenses. And it's the greatest sort of pleasure in my job. So let's see if I can make this move forward. There we go. So I always feel like, and I know that probably a lot of you have different definitions of trauma, but I feel like it's hard to jump into a conversation about anything that resembles growth or the impacts of trauma without making sure that I'm at least clear on where I talk about it from. I find sometimes the word trauma is actually one of those words that we assume everybody's talking about the same thing. Frequently we're not. So there is no universal 100%, definition. It is something that different people have worked on in different ways. I will say that for me, the first thing that I absolutely define trauma as an experience that's very human. People are equipped to experience and heal from trauma, and I very much believe that is sort of a forefront definition. And to be able to do that, we have to be afforded the right environment where the potential for healing can outweigh the potential for shame. And those two things are hard in traumatic incidents, but I believe very much in the human capacity. I consider incidents traumatic when somebody defines it as such, because it was a threat to their sense of self and safety. Most importantly, from my definition, is that individuals define it for themselves. What trauma is and how it impacts their life, I can't ever know from the outside. And for me, it's really important to say that before I go anywhere else, that it's hard because from the outside, we don't know. And I have to be able to listen and know people well enough to be able to be in the relationship and to be able to say that sometimes. Trauma lives in our body. It's not something that anyone would ever choose, and it's often inexplicable. And that's very important when we talk about the anniversary effects, that as long as, we know that very much it's a physiological response that is very logical for preservation, that we are animals who are both pack animals and pack animals who seek to avoid danger by learning. And those are the two things that for me are kind of the more core parts of how I think about trauma. I know there's a lot of more scientific, you can all read a lot more. I'm sure there's experts on here who know much more than I do on that area. But when I think about that definition, I think of the two pieces of being pack animals who can learn danger and try to avoid it as core elements to how we react and what happens in a society when we've had incidents that cause trauma. No trauma happens in a vacuum, right? There's a cumulative impact. We can't say that one incident. I often joke we could fund our resiliency center by people who say it's not 1027, it is. And I always say it's okay, right? It doesn't have to be anything. If you're feeling impacted, you're feeling impacted. And we don't have to make there be an it, but I think societally we kind of tell people there should be an it. So we try as much to not fill our cookie jar with dollar bills by people who say it's not this but that. We experience traumatic events that are primary, secondary, vicarious, and intergenerational, right? That to me, the more important part is just that we have the same body impacts a lot of the time, whether we had the incident to ourselves, whether or not we heard about it from somebody else, which is more secondary, vicarious, where we feel as though it could have happened for a number of reasons, and then the intergenerational. And I just think it's important because if we go back to my number one here, that when afforded the right environment for healing, where shame is decreased and potential is increased, we have to remind ourselves that it's totally normal to have a physiological traumatic impact from something that we didn't experience ourselves. because I find that's one of the areas that we really struggle to help people heal from if we feel like we shouldn't feel the way we feel. So those are my really basic, my definition of trauma. I invite anyone to throw into chat if there's something in there that you would say you would disagree with. You can also say if there's any one piece of those kind of core pieces that really resonates with you. No pressure, but if you wanted to say either one that doesn't resonate or one that does, that's actually super helpful also for me to know, but also for each other to know of kind of the different ways we see these things. So I will, whenever you want, you're welcome to do that. All right, and then I am gonna go, oops. Okay, so community resiliency and trauma work, informed work. So like, I just went into kind of my definition of trauma. I also wanted to say my definition of communities, right? Communities are places that are made up of individuals. Individuals bring with them their personality, their past experiences, and their current experiences and behavior. All of that is, and of course, individuals seek to sync with other individuals, right? That's another one of those biological urges we have. We have a drive towards creating community by syncing with each other. And I would say that societally, some humans allow for that better than other societies. Our more individualistic culture does not encourage us to do that, which is one of our biggest things that we have to overcome in communal trauma, is that we sort of have this desire to, instead of sync, to withdraw from people. And so when we look at resilient communities and what trauma-informed communities might look like, we want to sort of think a little bit about that area. And that together we create group norms that can either help validate each other, can alienate each other, or ignore each other. And that those group norms will greatly impact the individuals that make up our community and how we understand an event that impacted a lot of different people. I would assume that none of this feels totally foreign, but I think that the part that that we really think about is this last part, that these norms are greatly impacted by individuals, and that what happens is we have a situation when there's a communal trauma, which we're all here because of a mass violence incident that has impacted our lives or the lives of people around us. And so when there's a mass violence incident, there's one event that caused this trauma, and there's a community who feels it in very different ways. What happens more often, like every single day right now as we sit here, is that individuals are experiencing a trauma, and then community wraps around them with care and compassion. That's sort of the way that we're more synced as a community to experience that. When my neighbor has a loss or a death in their family, I'll bake something and I go over and maybe check in with them a few weeks later. I remember that happened to them. But when it happens to us at the same time, it means that people don't always remember to check in on me. They don't necessarily remember what it might feel like for me. And that's going to be a little bit of the rub of what do we do to overcome that. So anniversary, it's, again, all of you have experienced a community trauma. Can I ask if you'll throw into chat whether or not you yay or nay for the word anniversary to describe a communal trauma that you've experienced? So I've got a few people who are, nobody likes it. Nobody's saying it's good. Some people who don't understand, but the word anniversary I'll say for our community in Pittsburgh, the first year was fairly controversial, right? Even just figuring out what word do we use to describe the annual remembrance that comes up around this trauma brought up its own disagreements and trauma. Because the challenge, I don't know if I'm hearing more people who feel kind of negatively about the word. And for a lot of us, it's supposed to be something, yeah, it's a time to remember those who were lost. That it's, Angelversary is a good one. Thank you, Jill. That it sometimes is a joyous thing. We think of our wedding anniversary. We might think of other anniversaries that are more positive connotation, and that it feels for a lot of people a little bit like it's taking over a term that was supposed to indicate something different. So we've got some people who like remembrance. Also, I really like what Rosemary said there. It doesn't bother me now, with the capital now, which I will take Rosemary to think that potentially it did bother you. And then somebody once said that to me. They said the first year I felt really strongly about how much it bothered me, but that over time the words aren't feeling as stinging as they may have at the beginning. And I'm sure that's not true for everybody. But I think that what Rosemary said about that, and I think remembrance in our community, they agreed on commemoration as a sort of to commemorate a time. I think some people find words that maybe are spiritually linked, some people find words, but that the word itself matters is sort of my point to all of that, is that it's the beginning, it's the jumping off point for an acknowledgement of something. And if we go back to the idea that when there's group norms, we can either validate each other, right? We can actually hurt each other, or we can ignore each other. And so the use of the words and the question of did we ask to find out enough to know which words are upsetting is an important sort of starting point. And that not everybody will feel the same way. That there's no way we can know every opinion, or that we can always find the right term, but we can at least try in dialogue. Anniversary effect, right? And so it's a set of unsettling feelings, thoughts, or memories that occur in the anniversary of a significant experience. I will not ask people to share if they've ever necessarily had an anniversary effect, but one of the things that I would say is if everyone can sort of think a little bit about what it has felt like for them. You don't have to put it in the chat, but just a little bit of what their anniversary emotional experience is like, because if you can sort of sit with what you would describe, maybe the top 3 emotions that show up for you around the annual time. Some people it's not the actual calendar date. Some people it is connected to a birth date or a holiday. There's different reasons, different people have different dates, but whatever your date is, what are the feelings that surface around that date for you? And again, not in the chat, that's just a personal thought to hold on to. And so I think of the anniversary effect as very similar to what, I'm not sure if in this group you guys have talked a little bit about triggers before. And we've sort of tried to shift our language from the word trigger to take away violent language and imagery to describe a trauma. We try to find better ways, and this is a constant self-evolution. I'll tell you, every single day I try to find words that do not use violent imagery, and it is amazing to me how hard it is. But trauma cues has been easy for me to adopt over triggers. But the anniversary effect is really a trauma cue, right? That and there's many trauma cues that are around. Sometimes a trauma cue can be a smell, sight, sound. Sometimes it can be something that is more like the person. And then the idea of kind of the trauma cue being sometimes a season, some sort of indication, a type of weather, the type of year it is, where we are. Activate. And I'm assuming the word activate in the way of trauma cue instead of using the word trauma cue. Yeah, and I think, I think that activation, activating, kind of how we use that word, but it seems like that's more popular. So I appreciate that. But I think that, the anniversary effect is a trauma cue. It is an activation, and people experience them differently. But in a community where you're kind of all together, when we have this internal calendar that all of a sudden are popping up, anybody who's a parent and maybe has lived in a house where we all start menstruating at the same time, the idea that we sort of have this syncing of our bodies that happen all of a sudden, and sometimes that can be good, but sometimes in things like when we're more hormonal, or when we have a reminder or an activation, that's not always the best thing to be happening all at the same time. So, this whole idea that in some ways our bodies want to sync, and then in other ways, it's actually something we're fighting against when it comes to communal trauma and creating group norms that help us. I refer back to when I think about the anniversary effect, and I think it's actually like this little chart here. I don't know, maybe a hand raise of how many people have seen this before. Getting mostly no's. Okay, so I was working with my community, and this is my community. This is where I'm from. This is where I go to the grocery store. That's where my kids are. We're part of a very small community that experiences communal trauma. And so, you know, the idea that they're sort of on this left axis, we've got the emotional lows and highs, and then the time period on the bottom. And I don't know that the actual date matters as much, but thinking a little bit that when there's this communal trauma, when there's one event that people are all reacting to, you also have this norming that happens in almost a fairly predictable fashion as a community, which is that before the disaster, we're sort of in an emotional even period. The impact happens and people are horrified. And then as a community, we hit the heroic or honeymoon phase, and that's fairly common. And I work with other resiliency centers in other cities. And I would say that this is especially true with mass violence incidents that are public. When there is more public identity, it brings a lot of negative things with it. But one of the things that it brings is this sense of stronger together, moving forward together, bringing some identity around being a community that faces this event as it happened. And so, you know, in that immediate phase, I think, you know, for a lot of the people directly impacted, they're already involved in a lot of other things. They're very involved at that point and a lot of life stuff that has to happen. But the community is usually surrounding around at that point and trying to be helpful and kind and offering help. And we call that kind of that heroic to honeymoon phase. And this is all sort of in those first, say, 3 months. And not, you know, that's not perfect in terms of the timeline. It depends sometimes on context. You know, the number of people impacted, the size of the community, the cohesion of the community. But that what happens almost universally is that any honeymoon for a communal norming is going to be followed by disillusionment. And I wish somebody had told me that while we were on our way towards the honeymoon, because it feels really bad. It feels really, really bad to feel like, wait, we're all in this together. We can do this. Oh, maybe we're not. Maybe, you know, all of a sudden it feels like everything is going wrong. People are starting to fight. There's things that are coming off, you know, the wheels are coming off all around us. I 10,000%, not 1,000%, but 10,000% in the chat. It is, I mean, it's a really difficult time, and then it can come up and down a little bit. And they call these, this chart was made in 2000 by the Red Cross, I think. So they call it trigger events, but activation events, right? That happen in between there. Maybe a news story, maybe a trial, whatever those things might be. But my point with kind of where we are tonight is that remembering we go from this heroic honeymoon, disillusionment, and some point in there, usually that 1 year mark comes around. We get to that 1 year mark. And it is a really difficult time because if you think about the fact that you went from believing we're synced up as a community, we are feeling these sense of power and control and togetherness, to this feeling of, will it ever be okay again? Am I ever going to be okay again? I can't believe it's been a year. I can't believe it's only been a year. And that when we're all doing that together, it's one thing, again, when I do that, when I have a personal loss or a personal trauma and my friends all come over and get me ice cream, and maybe like that's an okay way to face it. But when we're all in it together, what that looked like in my community, I don't know about your all community, but I went to the gym on the morning of the 1 year mark, and there was a fist fight over a spinning bike. I've never seen that before. I think the truth was that everybody just felt activated and didn't know the words to put to it. And then we're just in a spinning class where someone wanted to sit somewhere and another person wanted to sit somewhere else. It happens at the grocery store. I noticed cashiers being a little bit more short-tempered. I noticed the fact that people just were having trouble interacting with each other, especially that first year around the anniversary. And that made us start talking a lot about, hey, I wonder if we could do this better. I wonder if there's ways that we can norm something different if we don't just leave it to chance. And, you know, that's during this reconstruction period, right? We start building a new beginning at that other side. And during that reconstruction phase, it's the question of, okay, we know that this part, disillusionment and the anniversary action, those were all really difficult times, and that we learned something about each other in it. We did have some sort of ability to gain perspective and learning, just it came with a cost. Is there any way we can do it with less cost going forward as a community? And so I think like the idea that if we're going to experience anniversaries in community, that we want to recreate those norms. So the sort of that lack of empathy, that turning inward that we often do naturally, how is it that we actually give word to that and invite people? What is a public service campaign? And I'm really putting this out there as a question mark for people to think about. What would a public service campaign look like? What would it look like to give advice through our religious institutions on how you help people through that time? What does it look like to reach to the masses and to try and tell a message that's helpful? Um, and I think that that part that like the pain can make us feel so alone, that we're looking for other people to tell us what's normal, right? And like that's a sort of normal thing to be doing, which is and then reacting to those people because maybe we thought they were going to tell us what was normal, and then we don't like what they're doing. We don't like what they're saying. We don't like something about what their choices are. And rather than making that have introspection, a lot of time it turns into looking at them. And I think that, you know, one of the things that I would hope from this conversation and from people who have lived experience is that we do challenge people to see the anniversary effect as something that is predictable and painful. And that when we're part of a community, can we find different ways to both be in disillusionment in ways that don't cause more pain, and also to be in healing in ways that can potentially help us grow together. And we'll have some chat at the end. So just to sort of plant that and a few more kind of quick thoughts that go with it. Disillusionment, that phase that shows the crash cut we come down off of honeymoon, it's both normal and toxic in communities that have experienced trauma. So how do you deal with things that are both normal and toxic? We predictably will go through this. How is it that we can do it with less casualty? And then I think, you know, not surprisingly to any of you, but feeling weary and exhausted by carrying the weight of the disaster for people who are directly impacted, that weariness and exhaustion is something that is so palpable. For people who were indirectly impacted and maybe felt like they were part of the heroic phase, they also can get burned out. They can also hit a place where they maybe are not their best selves in relationship to this. And it comes from sort of that natural burnout cycle from putting a lot of themselves into something and then maybe feeling like they are just kind of feeling tired. And the hard part I find is that when there's a mass violence incident, we talk about those concentric circles of the impact, and the people on those closest circles lost loved ones, maybe first responders, survivors, witnesses, the community around them, other people who identify into the event. The hard part is when we're weary and exhausted, we don't really see each other or ourselves in those concentric circles in any kind of way. It feels kind of muddy and complicated. And that one of the things we want to try to do is figure out, how do we help people name that? How do we build some awareness so that we can at least see it when it's happening and not feel like we're surprised by it? So that challenge of wanting to go back to normal is very much part of disillusionment. Can't we go back to the day before this all happened? Minimizing with worse has happened. I don't know if those two things kind of are often similarly apathetic is how I think of them. Things where we start to not feel as compassionate towards others. We want to either go back to normal. Can't you just move past this? And then that minimizing of, you know, other people have gone through stuff or worse has happened. And that during disillusionment, there's sometimes that moral superiority of being able to push through the terrible things. I'm resilient. I'm strong. I'm going to show everybody because somehow that's better. And often that comes at such a big cost that in that wave, if we're part of a community that's going through pain, remembering that doing that is actually toxic. That's part of what's leading to the toxicity in the community. And so it's hard to name that sometimes because people are feeling so strong. And if you say that's okay if you're feeling that way, but you don't have to prove that to any of us, right? That's not going to get us anywhere. And then invalidating to people who are feeling distressed. There's so much where that period of time is so invalidating. So alternatively, right, we can work on empowerment. That disillusionment is really that feeling when we are not feeling like we are as empowered. So taking charge of the narrative and memories of the difficult times. So in that period when the heroic phase ends, the honeymoon's ending, a lot of time that means also that the attention is starting to shift to something else. And it's a really good time to help other people take charge of a narrative. How do they start to frame what they want the world to know, what they want people to know, what's true for them? That's much more empowering place to go when and you can do that when you're in a sad, hard, suffering place. You can also use that time to be able to say, this is what's true for me. You don't have to wait for that sort of to not be where you are. Integrating who we are with who we who we were with who we are. So during that disillusionment phase, like that, really combating that sense of can't we just go back? No, we're going to go forward with what has happened, right? We're going to go forward with the pain, and we're going to go forward with maybe new relationships that are also going to help build us up. So as a community, if we resist norms that try to go backwards, then we have a better chance of carrying that sort of sense of we can move with this. And that healing can only happen when we name, accept, and move with the pain, right? That kind of concept that we have to, as a community, notice those things. Creating a space to remember shows the courage to face what was difficult. And the picture I put in here is for our Resiliency Center. This is our steering committee, who are all stakeholders in the event. And we've all wrestled through a very long road at now almost 6 years later, of really ups and downs and disillusionment. And to me, one of the things of the reason to work on these things is that I love now being on the other side with these amazing people who have wrestled with me and taught me so much, and that we can continue the work. And that there were moments in that disillusionment where I felt as though maybe that would not happen. Maybe we were done. And it felt so hard. Everything felt so hard. But that there is a reason we wrestle through and try to take a shift from disillusionment to empowerment, with the hope that some of those relationships will be things that bolster us forward. I think we can't talk about all this without talking about the word resilience. And I really myself I've tried to learn a lot about the diverse feelings about the word resilience. So I'll say with sort of very full knowledge that resilience can sometimes be weaponized to seem as though people are stronger or more powerful than other people. And I definitely don't use it in those terms. I think of resilience in the terms that a gentleman who worked for me who had been a refugee taught me, which was it's just about throwing a ball forward always, walking towards it and picking it up and throwing it again. And it's not about doing it in the most graceful way. It's not about bouncing back. It's about that sort of ability and bravery to continue to walk as far as you can see and then figure it out the next step. But I, in the sort of vein of resilience and trauma and healing, My Grandmother's Hands, has anybody read that book? By Resma Menachem. I don't want to mispronounce his name. But somebody gave it to me right before we had our trial process. And it's really about intergenerational trauma and healing, but a lot of that has to do with what communal trauma looks like and the ways we face. And the book is specifically around reckoning with racism as sort of an intergenerational trauma in our country. But the quote that I really love is that healing with other human beings requires us to respect, regard, and be in harmony with other bodies. He makes the case that all of our trauma and intergenerational trauma is in our body. No one would ever choose it. It's not logical. But that the healing requires us to respect, regard, and be in harmony. And I love the word regard. For me, I thought of that a lot with this kind of concept of anniversary effects, that we have to regard. We don't have to we don't have to invite, we acknowledge, we see, but acknowledge to me, even I felt like that word regard really resonated. And then making that space for the diverse experiences, even with the same event, allows space for healing. That we can, that disillusionment is when we realize we're not all in this exactly together. But the empowerment is when we say, that's okay. We don't have to all feel it the same way. We don't all have to be in the same space, because I see you and I regard you, right? And I respect you. And I hope people see me and regard me and respect me. and that you don't have to ever do it as I do it, and I don't ever have to do it as you do it. And so as we find anniversary effects coming up for people, if we can give that permission, we all can do this so much better because no one has to do it alone, and no one has to look around for that question of, am I okay? Are they okay? Is this right? Is this wrong? And then we can learn and heal in direct experiences we had directly, or we can learn and heal from experience we had directly, but also those of other people when we're open ourselves up to that regard. And being in that harmony, we can really learn with them, which to me, I've adopted this vicarious resilience mantra. Really that I have the opportunity through exposure and learning to gain resilience that other people have gained through hard fought battles. And I am so grateful when they share that with me and are generous with it. And that's absolutely the peer support model you guys all are emboldened with, is that exact principle. And I think it's the most healing thing we can have. So how do we support ourselves around the anniversary effect, right? Always start with how to ground in the present. That My Grandmother's Handbook has really good tools for how to ground in the present, but there's a ton out there. But the most important thing with the anniversary effect, we want to bring ourselves back to today, and to not let ourselves feel as though we are in that moment. Anticipate, predict, prepare. This is my mantra. It's hard on year one. We don't know exactly how to anticipate, predict, prepare, but by multiple years when we've been through something, we can say, I know I feel lonely. So the best way that I can sort of predict how that will land and what I might do in my behavioral response is to prepare through being around a few people who might be helpful, right? But whatever it is, sort of our own tools for anticipate, predict, prepare, or in a peer space, asking people, what are you going to do to anticipate, predict, prepare? If you want to go into the woods and shut the world out, that's okay. But what about that is going to prepare you to get through this in the way that's constructive for you? Taking control over media consumption, especially with an event that was public, and around the anniversaries. It's the blessing and the curse of mass violence, I think, is to some degree that the media doesn't forget a lot of the time, but then the media has a lot of control over our own feelings of connection and validation. So be intentional, either be intentional through trying to engage the media to make sure they don't forget, or avoiding, whatever the right path for you might be. Talk about it in a way that you have full control over who you talk to and about what you talk. Don't feel like, the anniversary is a really typical time that sometimes we have this trauma flood where we then say things that we didn't really mean to say. We might tell a story that we just didn't really think that person was somebody I wanted to share that story with, knowing that that's a normal part. So just figuring about who do you want to talk to, and what sort of your own personal limits you've come to of what you want to share and don't want to share, because it's yours to do that with. Connect with others, find spaces to validate your experience. Like I said, that for some people, being in a big, large gathering is a great way to validate that they're not alone and that this event really did happen, and that we remember the victims, we remember the people together. But some people find that very invalidating. They find it very invisible. So if it's being with that one person that gets you and is able to do that, but knowing that we all want to be validated, we just don't all know how to. And so how do we try to find those tools every year? Creating healthy ritual that grounds you in the present. I think ritual is wonderful. So, if you are part of a community that has a ritual remembrance, that's great. If you're not, you have every tool to create it. Talk to people. Is it that you like to do a volunteer project? I know a wonderful person who's on this call who every year commemorates through doing an outreach project. That's a wonderful ritual that helps you to be grounded in the present of being giving back. Remembering that, anniversary effect, and that a lot of times any activation event is temporary and healthy, because suffering is human. It's unpleasant, but it doesn't mean that there's something. One of the things I hear from people a lot of times is, what's wrong with me? I thought I was past this. I thought I was on this other side. So, I always say you are, and that doesn't mean you're immune from feelings. And then how to support others. I'm not going to go too far into this because I think you've probably have all done some of this, and it's also like there's a lot to be done, but how do we validate other people when it's not our event, but when we are maybe trying to support somebody else? And I always say, remembering that they're the experts in their life. So approaching every person as though they're unique and their pain is unique. And so when it's a friend or family member, helping people to remember how to normalize the experience and also allow them to be unique, right? Those two sort of contradictory pieces. Normalize, I know for some people, the 1 year is hard. Is there anything I can do for you or anything that feels right for you? Some way to both kind of make it normal and also to allow them to be the expert. And then, I think that one of these pieces, asking directly if you want to be a helper for somebody else, do they prefer to be distracted or discuss the pain? Which is their tool? What do they want? And then, being able to be with them in either one of those. So these are just kind of some basics. I think there's a lot more to go with this, and I actually think probably you all could write the book on how to offer support based on things that you've maybe experienced. And I would love to read that book at some point because I think we fall short so often. So I'm going to stop my share. If people want to have questions or want to talk about any of those topics, I just wanted to kind of throw all that out there. And I appreciate the 1,000% or 10,000%. Sorry, it's a lot of percents, a lot of zeros. But I think the idea that I really do hope everybody can carry with kind of this sense that the disillusionment or feeling really let down is an okay and healthy part of being in a community, but it's also really unpleasant. And what can we do to try and minimize those impacts is the biggest thing for me with the anniversary effect.
If anybody has any questions, if you could please put it in the chat. And Maggie, I just want to thank you. I know for me, the first couple of years, I didn't realize that there was such a thing. And when I finally realized it, it gave so much validation to how I had felt. And I try to remember to talk to other people who have been impacted and just remind them about that and that let them know that it's our feelings are normal feelings for the abnormal incident that we went through. And it's hard because oftentimes our family and friends don't understand, but that's why we have this community.
And it's also why healing people heal people, because people who have gone through and figured this out are so much better at telling somebody else, just, hey, I know this thing exists and I don't know what it'll feel like for you, but I can tell you it didn't feel good for me. But that you think about, gosh, it would be so nice if so many more people offered that tidbit of wisdom.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, I know that I felt like I went into it quicker this year because of an incident that happened. And it was just, it kind of stirred me up and I jumped in earlier than I normally might have. So it's hard because you can never predict what, when, how. But just, for everybody, please know that it's a very valid thing.
Hello, Maggie. Thank you so much. This has been extremely, extremely helpful and relatable. I think I've screenshotted slides just to read later.
You can have them all, just so you know.
Thank you. I very much appreciate it. Something that stood out was the integrating, I forget which slide it was on, but integrating who we were then with who we are now.
Mhm.
And for me, I would say that that's been the most challenging thing of the last 7 years almost, I guess now, is just like befriending that I am today, while not totally losing touch with the Haley that I was before everything that happened. So I just want to say thank you for like normalizing that and putting words to things that I can't often put words to. The question I have is, for me, I have multiple of like traumatic events that have like dates, of anniversaries, if you will, of remembrance dates. There's 3 of them in my life that are pretty pivotal, excuse me.
Yeah.
How can we, I don't want to say, like, how do you minimize the impact that it has? Because I feel like 3 months out of every 12, I'm like, my brain goes crazy and I'm short, short fuse, and like, I'm getting better and better, I think, with figuring it out over time. And as each year passes with each event, the anniversary or remembrance date, whatever we call it, I'm just curious from your perspective. Is there things that we could do? Ritual probably help, but any insight on that?
Yeah, I
Thanks
mean,
again.
I think what you're saying and what Jill just said also, like the idea that yes, and as long as it's always remembered that sometimes there's some predictable pattern of kind of 2 weeks or 4 days. I mean, someone in my life related to the shooting, you know, it's very predictable exactly at 4 days, except this year at the 5-year mark, it changed. But she has a 4 days out and then 2 days after that it is every year kind of predictable. And so the challenge being that it's not a perfect science, but that the more and more we can build up those anticipate, predict, prepare, and rituals, then it gives us an ability. The ritual piece allows you to focus on sort of a planning that feels familiar and feels like it's regaining the agency over that date because it's something you're planning. And I think one of the things I find is hard is that for a lot of people, they don't really want to do anything, which makes perfect sense. They don't really want to do anything, and so then they don't make a plan, but then that lack of doing that is sometimes the biggest challenge. So even if you call your ritual like something that's very small, if it is about, you know, for those 4 days, I only eat takeout. I won't cook, right? It's gonna my no cook and making a name for it. It doesn't actually always have to be some big thing. It's not that you're gonna get to go to France every year for that period of time to remove yourself from the trauma cues. But that if you can find a name and a way to have identity for that time period so that you don't do what the alternative, which is to shove it, hope it doesn't bother you, and then be surprised it does, and it takes over and it kind of occupies a bigger period of time. So that, I mean, that's the best advice, knowing that, you know, that's the best, advice that I have. I'm actually sure that there's other people, and I would welcome if people have things that they can offer into the chat that have worked for you to at least allow that period of kind of unsettled, a lot of people cloudy, maybe moodier, how to try to contain that to less time when you have, especially if you have, as Haley said, multiple in a year, which I think is true for people because no trauma happens in a vacuum. And then probably those 3 events are also different. So how much attention and weight gets put on each of them based on how it resonates with you in your own body and how your body tells you to pay attention. You know, noticing which ones you have to give weight. Does anybody else have any other things that have worked for them to try and do that?
Yeah, Maggie, Jackie, I agree with you with the ritual and trying to not ignore it. We have a situation in our family where there's my son's birthday, March 8th, my birthday, March 10th, and my late husband, his dad, passed away March 9th. Great. And so what we've tried to do is to focus on the birthdays. We recognize the day, but focus on the events that are positive for sure. And also connecting with other people that share your experience. Like if you know, like with our loss, it's connecting with family and doing something with family. If it's, you know, in the, you know, your community of survivors, your larger community, something like that. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and Jackie, I mean, I think probably everyone at some point will have like either a holiday or birthday that conflicts with also heightened trauma time in their life, and that is often difficult. And the number of people I know who now do like Christmas in July or Thanksgiving in March, you know, that remembering that part of moving with something is being flexible enough to make both work. If you've always loved Thanksgiving, but unfortunately there was a traumatic incident that kind of took that holiday from you, don't let it take it from you, even if you realize, you know what, that time of year is just never a good time for me to get together with everybody. So can I have my own Thanksgiving ritual? That is my
For sure.
ritual I get to own. And so I think, like, you know, that remembering that we sometimes have to, moving with means also creatively putting things into
Yeah, for
places
sure.
for joy filled.
Yeah, we may do our birthday celebration and enjoy something that he would have liked, you know. So yeah, you can do both. Both things can exist. that just because we have this traumatic date doesn't mean our birthdays aren't still cool, because they are. So, yeah, for sure. Thank you.
And if on certain years you need to move something, either the remembrance or a birthday, you know, like those things can happen.
Yeah, I love that, because even, with holidays, there's a lot of single parent households, and there's, joint custody. So you may not celebrate Christmas Day on Christmas with one of your parents or a loved one. And it's okay. You can celebrate it the next day, the next week, in July if you want. It's what feels good to you.
And I think, I mean, with all of this, it's all this sort of a similar thing, which is that whatever it is, allowing yourself to find choice in it and to feel like there's some choice. You may not have all choice. You can't turn back time and you can't change the fact that you have to share Christmas, but then you have lots of choices once you think about the fact that you can't turn back time and you can't necessarily change that custody agreement. But that there is a lot of time to make choices that are values based, right? Like, how do I still live out those values that were important to me, even if I have to shift some pieces of this? If I want there to be a surprise in Santa on Christmas morning, I can make up any way to make that happen. I can do it, right? I can find a way to do it, or I can feel like someone took that from me. And part of that reframing is finding a way to find that control again, even if it's not because you have full control, but there's something you have control over.
I tend to use my anniversary not only to reflect on the people that we lost, but to look at the post-traumatic growth that I've had over the last almost 7 years, which I'm not gonna say it makes it easier, but it benefits me, and it doesn't necessarily pull me down on that day. It's a somber day no matter what, but there's a lot that I've learned and changed and grown from. And it took a little while to do that, but post-traumatic growth is real.
Yeah, is anybody else willing to share a ritual that maybe they've found meaningful? We sort of talked about volunteering or community service. Is there any other rituals? Yeah.
I had the same thing. My first husband passed away when my son was 5, and all our birthdays were in February, days apart, and he passed away in May. And for the beginning, we would go, go to the cemetery, take, some balloons, and every time my son went and got groceries, he'd ask the lady for a balloon, and she'd be like, "Oh, here you go," and he'd be like, "It's for my dad in heaven," and then they would just be like, ah. So we started like, as he got older, we celebrated the birthday, not the death day. And that really helped. And then I found out with Route 91, it's like, with any hard anniversary time, it's the leading up to it and the anticipation of it. And then once it's here, it's almost like a release, like, it wasn't nearly as bad as it was last year or the year before. And so once getting past the anticipation, so this year I was away for a really special event, and it happened right on the same weekend. And what I learned was, I agree with Jill, the post-traumatic growth is amazing. And so I enjoyed this event that I was invited to. And then I acknowledged, what I went through and the people that had passed and that, but I didn't sit in it. And I said to myself that day, I went, it was so amazing to be able to be away, not feel guilty about it, and be able to do something that was important to me and part of my growth and propelled me into my future. And so every year I'm like, I want to do something special that involves celebrating me, acknowledging what was done and the people that have been passed, but also like moving forward with my life. I mean, that I survived it, and every day I'm grateful of that. So it's not about me at all. It's just about giving giving yourself what you need to. Like, I know other people might celebrate it and they feel all sad and they spend their day feeling sad. And, I get that, but these people that have passed don't want us to feel sad. They want us to grow and be enriched and learn something by the tragedy. And going back to just feeling sad every time isn't what I want to do. And it isn't what they would want us to do. So it's not like I'm being all about me. It's just being there's growth and there's happiness, and it's like celebrating with your family or whoever, people that went through it or people that didn't go through it, celebrating that we're all moving forward. And the 5th year anniversary, I felt that. I felt the connection of the people was lighter, and people were all kind of a step out of their grief a little bit better. And the first year was awful. And I don't want to sit in that pain. I've been sitting in it every single day since it happened. And I'm trying to look at something that's on a positive note instead of still acknowledging and being respectful, but I get to acknowledge me too in that. And so that's kind of where I've shifted for
I
me.
love that,
Anyone
Lori.
that wants to come with me
Yeah.
I'm open. So
The one part about you sort of saying like it's all about me or it's not all about me, but it is all about, right? Like we are responsible for ourselves. And so I think like it is so nice to hear you say like that you felt really proud that when you did something for yourself and you felt like it was the exact right thing to do. That is all about you in the way that it absolutely should be. Right? Because that you are only living you and that you can only know it when you've done it. And so I just wanted to reflect and say thank you for sharing that. And for, sometimes it sounds like what you did was take a bit of a leap of faith, which is to do what you haven't done and wonder how it will land. Which I'm sure you're not the only person who will have to do that, like to have to sort of break ritual, to try something different. And I just wanted to sort of applaud you for what you sort of said, that you both were conscious of it and also able to be where you were because you felt like you had gotten there through hard work and that you wanted to be in a happy moment. So
because
thank you.
the biggest struggle I've had in this is trying to go back to the person I was before. And that person isn't coming back. I am not anywhere near that person. I look like that person. I talk like that person maybe, but I'm not that person. And so the struggle was so real. And even celebrating the anniversary with the 2 friends that I have here, the way they think that we should celebrate it isn't the way I think we should celebrate it. So I just don't do that anymore. So we can say no too to something that we don't feel comfortable doing that might keep us in a place of sadness. Right? And
Yeah. I love to listen to you explain things. It's just, you have just such a beautiful way with words. And, we've been talking about personal growth, and the word growth means active, being active. It doesn't just happen to you or any of us. You have to actively be part of it and look for it and make change, right? And so, and that's what you've done, and look what it's
I
got.
try.
Huh?
There's moments where it's difficult, but I think in the
Oh
overall
no, I'm not
trajectory.
saying it's easy.
No, I know you weren't. I'm just meaning like, like today is a good day. Today feels good. And that's what I try to do moving forward. But it's baby steps, a few forward, a few back, but the trajectory is like that 2-degree shift that we talk about, right? Like doing a little bit. And then by the time the year comes up, you're in a different place than you were last year, for sure.
Yeah.
Every year,
And
every
I mean,
year
I
gets
think,
easier.
the takeaway is, always be looking for opportunities for growth.
That's my dog.
Just that's my takeaway from what I hear from you. Always be looking for opportunities for growth, personal growth, in whatever way, because I think we're never done. We're never done growing in our journey of what we've experienced. I was recently, I ran full speed ahead into an opportunity, and I knew it was going to be an awful opportunity, but I knew I was willing to take that risk, and I did it. And what I came out of through that opportunity is nothing short of amazing, and I'm so glad that I did this. It was a research study. I'm not going to get into it, but it was excruciating. But the outcome, I have a whole new life. But I took that chance. I took that opportunity, you know, and it's just, I'm so grateful I did.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think, and that's so awesome. I think too, sometimes when it is a community, everyone thinks they have to grieve the same way as the
Yeah,
person beside them, and
like
almost,
your friends. Yeah.
you know, following the course. And we're also individual, and we all have different experiences too. That one trauma affected other traumas, and so, you know, we can't look at it necessarily as the community sometimes. And
We heal differently, we grieve differently. Yeah.
yeah.
And I think, you know, sometimes I've found it's hard because of that looking for kind of group norming to either be validated, invalidated, or sometimes hurt. And that the question of how can we do different and do it with validation of each other? And that especially, at least in our community, can be sometimes hard, which is to say, like, why are you still doing that? I don't like it. Instead of just saying, you know, I'm really glad you're still doing that, and I'm not going to do it. But I'm really glad, you know, to the person who benefits from it, that I'm glad they're benefiting, but I also know it's not that this year, this is my choice of what I want to do. And that
Mhm.
is hard. That is a hard thing, because it does feel like sometimes it gets set up for it to be a right or wrong, when we all know sort of, I think, in one part of our brain that there's no right and wrong. But I do see it happening, that within that a daughter mother dynamic, you know, one of them wants to do one thing, the other one has trouble seeing them do that without putting it down a little bit, only because it feels like, well, maybe that's right, or maybe this is right. And none of it's right, none of it's wrong. It all is.
Yeah. There can be a lot of judgment based on where people are sitting in their growth and their traumas. And
Yeah.
trauma's lifelong. So it's, you know, healing's lifelong, and so is growth. So yeah, I think it's not so scary anymore when you take control, as if you can, right? How it works best for you. That's my last hurrah.
Kind of add to what you're saying, I initially thought that I wanted to be in Vegas every year on October 1st. And that was my goal. That was what I was going to do. And then I moved out here. I was there the first 3 years. I was living in San Diego at the time of the event. I moved out here. And the next year I didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. And it felt so weird to not go back because everyone was doing it. But because a lot of route survivors have moved here, I organized something here with people. So that's my new thing. And if I don't want to do it this year, that's okay. Because it's about me. You know, I'd love getting together with everybody, but we have to remember that nobody is going to heal for us. This is our work and our responsibility. And what we want to do each year can be different, and that's okay. Just honor ourselves and honor those who were lost.
And Jill, your healing can happen wherever you are. You don't have to go to Vegas, right?
Nope.
That's what you're saying. You
Yep.
don't have to go to Vegas for your healing. You can do it right where you are. Yeah,
And
that's great.
if I decide next year that I want to go to France, you know, I can do that. It's okay. So it just, you know, I think the biggest thing is to give ourselves grace during the period of the anniversary effect. You know, we say that all the time, but even more so in the time leading up to that day, because we never know how we're going to feel from year to year or from day to day. So we have a comment. Really appreciate this discussion. I've been struggling with a judgment from my family about not meeting their expectations for my healing progress. Having a hard time finding a supportive community where I live. Just had a 5-year anniversary last week and it feels really uncomfortable. And you are definitely not alone. I like to say that while I wish my friends and family understood, I'm so glad that they don't. And before going through my incident, I wouldn't have been able to understand like I do now. So it's really hard. And that's why being a part of a community like this is so important, because nobody understands like somebody else who has experienced what we have.
Yeah, and I don't know whether your family is open to it, but sometimes I say, you know, it would be great if those people who feel like they're wondering why or how you're feeling the way you are, if they also wonder what the pain might feel like if they allow themselves to understand kind of the hard parts and the suffering, because a lot of times, you know, people in this sort of, and especially even people who care about you a lot, want you to be somewhere that you're not. Like this is, you know, I'm a mom now. I see it with my children where I would really love for them to be doing things that are more constructive with their time than scrolling on the screen. So you know, I often am throwing out judgment, but I'm also not ever acknowledging I have to work to acknowledge what they may be getting out of it. And I think sometimes encouraging family to say, if you ever want to understand where I am, I would talk to you about it. I don't know, you know, I don't know enough to tell you or educate you, but if you were curious instead of judging, then it might make it easier for me.
Yeah, and for me, I think I know this now, I put a level of expectation on my brothers in particular that they could never fulfill. Like, I know what I would give them as far as support if it had happened to them. And so that was my level of expectation of them. And I now know that they never had it to give. So that paradigm shift for me was very healing. I mean,
What helped you make that paradigm shift? What was sort of the moment?
Therapy,
Mhm.
some real intensive therapy. And I mean, we have different journeys in life. They have not done any work on their childhood stuff. And so we don't have a relationship. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff there. And that's all really come out since the shooting, actually. So, and I'm at peace with that. I'm
Yeah.
sad about it, but I'm at peace with it.
Well, that's wonderful. And I asked that question because it is hard sometimes to find that peace when there's such a different way to approach things. And so I applaud
You know
you.
what?
For getting there.
It was on site. For those of you who know what on site is, it was on site that brought me to that.
I know that for me, I used to think that I used to expect everybody to treat me like I treat them.
Yes, the same level of expectation, and I was wrong.
Yeah. And it's really hard to realize that not everybody is capable of that. You know, and
No,
this is in
I
all
get
walks
it
of life,
now.
whether it's, you know, a mass violence incident or anything else. You know, it's not, we can't expect people, and this is a new realization for me. We can't expect people to be us,
Yep,
you
absolutely.
know, and that took me a long time to figure out. But I'm glad I did.
Yeah, it's a light switch. When it goes on, you're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I've done this.
Yeah.
You know, I have done this to them. And this is why they've behaved the way they behave. Well, this is part of the why they behaved the way they behaved. They didn't have it to give me.
Yeah.
They just have it. So, I mean, that helps a lot to soften my heart towards them. There's a lot of other things in there
Mhm.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. And somebody commented they appreciate being reminded that trauma is cumulative, and that's so true. I mean, I didn't realize that until after out, but man, I've had to unearth a lot of things in my now 52 years that just kind of came out after route. So I've been working with that with my therapist. I'm like, you know what? I'm being open and being vulnerable, so I might as well just get it all out.
Yep, because
And
that's where it starts, really.
yep,
That's where it all
yep,
starts.
exactly. Exactly.
You got to
So
go
does
from the
any
bottom up
yep.
instead of the top. Well, top down or bottom up, either way.
And sometimes kind of intermix
Yeah.
them, you know, but I mean, all the way back to childhood, I've learned some things that I went through have a direct
Mhm.
relation to decisions that I've made, choices I've made, and
Yep.
now I'm working to correct that so that I don't make those again.
Reparent the inner child.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Does anybody else have any more questions or comments before we move on?
I just wanted to sort of elevate a little bit of what kind of was going on both here in the chat, just this idea of kind of owning our own expectations of other people's judgment, and also kind of the ways in which judgment interlays with an anniversary effect, the judgment of others. And so I think, you know, there's a lot that you guys just talked about and that has been shared in the chat, and a lot of really important things that can be gained by kind of being aware of that judgment and not taking it in, and rather Tefloning it, figuring out how to not let their judgment stick. But that's a lot to ask of people. So I think there's ongoing conversations and work that can happen, but it is such a great thing for this peer space that people can know and hear that everybody's getting judgment of their healing journey from other people, and that none of them are the experts in your life. I can promise you the one thing I know for certain, there's very few things I know for certain. That's one thing I actually know for certain, is no one else is the expert in where you are, where you should be, or why you're there. And so how to deal with the pressure of that is probably a really important ongoing conversation.
Very. Alice put in the chat, and it's a great reminder for everybody, if you are looking for a trauma-informed therapist in your area, the Resiliency and Justice Center in Las Vegas can help. We have a mental health advocate who's amazing at finding somebody who has openings and will accept your insurance. So please reach out if you are looking for somebody. I know my therapist, I've had two now, one in California and one here, and it's made a huge difference. Just want to remind you guys about all of the resources that are available through the Resiliency and Justice Center. These are available to anyone impacted by any mass violence incident, and this is whether they were impacted directly or indirectly. This includes First Tuesdays with Heart, peer support, there's mindfulness and meditation programs, trauma recovery yoga, art therapy, and equine therapy demonstrations. The only one that is in person is the equine therapy demonstration. So if you happen to be in Las Vegas when they are doing one of the demonstrations, you're more than welcome to participate. And we just got word late this afternoon that we have been approved to start a support group for anyone impacted by any mass violence incident. We're still putting together everything, but Jackie will be facilitating and I will be assisting. We're thinking possibly the third Tuesday of each month. So it'll be first Tuesdays and third Tuesdays. Jackie is out of town the third Tuesday of this month, so we're trying to figure that out. But please, if you're on the First Tuesdays with Heart Facebook page, please pay attention to announcements for that. And I'll also be posting it on the Survivors of Mass Violence page. And then if you have any information or to register, you can go to the resiliencyandjustice.org calendar. And then this is just a brief overview of what we have going on this month. Anything that is in yellow that is not event specific is open to anyone who's been impacted by mass violence. If you'd like some additional support, you can request to be paired with a Heart mentor through the Resiliency and Justice Center's website. The disaster distress helpline is available 24/7. You can call or text 800-985-5990. Vibrant also has a website, safespace.vibrant.org. And that's to help anybody who is possibly feeling suicidal or, just kind of not sure about things. And then there's also the Survivors of Mass Violence Facebook page through the Disaster Distress Helpline that is monitored by trained peers from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. 7 days a week, and then 24/7 by crisis counselors. So there's always somebody, whether it's the middle of the night, you need to reach out. And it's the Disaster Distress Helpline is not a suicide helpline. They're there to support us no matter what, even if you just want to talk something through. The National Mass Violence Center also has a lot of amazing resources for all of us. And then the 988 suicide and crisis line, you can call or text 988. So next month, we're excited to have Molly and Lindsay Duncan talking about trauma and relationships. They had their own personal incident and have had to really fight through to save their marriage, and they're doing a great job of it. So I think it's something that we can all relate to, that relationships can be really hard, and especially if one person is growing in one direction, one person is growing in a different direction. One quick note, our October 1st Tuesdays with Heart will be held on Tuesday, October 8th. We did not want to hold it on the route anniversary. So we're moving it back a week. And if you have any questions or comments, topic suggestions, we'd love to hear from you what you'd like to hear about. This is for all of us, so we'd love your input. And you can either reach out to us via Facebook or through heartpure91@gmail.com. So thank you guys all for coming. We really appreciate the time. And we will be posting the recording of this in the next few days.